Ever feel like you're drowning in info when it comes to fat loss? Like, especially if you're trying to manage type 2 diabetes or just want to be as healthy as possible.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough to separate what actually works from all the noise out there.
Well, you found the study that really gets into the nitty-gritty of how diet and different amounts of exercise affect fat loss,
Mhm.
specifically for people with type 2 diabetes.
Yep, this deep dive is all about a study called Dose OCX.
So we're going to break down the most important parts for you. What's the best way to lose fat when you combine cutting calories with exercise? And how can you actually use this info in your everyday life? Okay, let's start with the basics. What exactly did the researchers do in the study?
All right, so they had 82 people with type 2 diabetes and they followed them for 16 weeks
50 weeks. Okay.
and they split them up into four groups.
Okay, tell me about these groups. What was each group doing?
Okay, so first you had your control group. They just continued with their normal care for type 2 diabetes. Then you had the diet control group, or DCON for short.
Decon, got it.
They focused on their diet, cutting their calorie intake by about 25 to 30%.
So a pretty big change in their diet there. What about the groups that were exercising?
Right, so the third group was the moderate exercise dose group, or MED.
MAD. Okay.
They followed the same calorie-restricted diet as DCON, but they also exercised 3 times a week. Two of those sessions were aerobic exercise and one combined aerobic and resistance training.
All right, so 3 times a week sounds pretty doable for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What about the fourth group?
That was the high exercise dose group, or HED.
HED, okay.
Same diet as DCON and MED, but they exercised twice as much as the MED group, 6 times a week.
Wow, 6 times a week?
4 aerobic sessions and 2 combined aerobic and resistance training.
So we've got a good range here. No intervention, diet only, diet with moderate exercise, and diet with a lot of exercise. What kind of exercises were they actually doing? We're not talking about crazy intense workouts, certainly.
No, not at all. For the aerobic exercise, they mostly used stationary bikes. And the resistance training focused on major muscle groups, things like chest presses, leg extensions, leg curls, and leg presses. They even did some supersets for abs and back muscles.
So a pretty well-rounded and practical exercise program. Did they just jump right into these routines at full intensity?
Actually, no. They gradually increased the intensity over those 16 weeks. So the first few weeks were more about getting familiar with the exercises and monitoring their heart rate and how hard they felt they were working, making sure they were training at a good level as they went along.
That makes sense. Got to build a solid base first. Sticking to a calorie-restricted diet for that long can be really tough. How did they make sure people were actually following the diet?
You know what? They had really good dietary adherence across all the diet groups.
Really?
Yeah, they got personalized guidance from a dietitian, regular check-ins, and participants even weighed all their food and kept these detailed records. And they had strategies in place to help get people back on track if they went way over on calories.
So they're pretty serious about this. Okay,
Mhm.
we have a good picture of how the study was set up. 4 groups, 16 weeks, careful tracking of both diet and exercise. Now let's get to the results. What did they find about fat loss? That's what everyone wants to know.
Right, so their main measure for fat loss was fat mass percentage, or FM%. And all 3 intervention groups, the diet-only, moderate exercise, and high exercise groups, all of them had a much bigger decrease in their FM% compared to the control group.
Well, yeah, it's not that surprising that cutting calories leads to some fat loss.
Hmm.
But how did adding exercise into the mix affect things?
That's the key part. They found this dose-dependent relationship with exercise. So basically, the more people exercise, the more their FM% went down. To give you some specific numbers, the diet-only group had an average decrease of 3.5% in FM% compared to the control group. The moderate exercise group, their decrease was 6.3%. And the high exercise group, they lost 8%.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Mm.
It really shows that exercise isn't just an extra thing. It actually speeds up fat loss when you're also cutting calories.
Exactly. And if you compare the exercise groups directly to the diet-only group, both the moderate and high exercise groups had a bigger decrease in FM%, like an extra 2.8% for moderate exercise and 4.5% for high exercise.
So adding exercise definitely helps you lose a more noticeable amount of fat percentage. Now, what about the difference between the two exercise levels? Was working out twice as much, going from 3 to 6 times a week, really worth it just for fat percentage?
That's a really good question. While the high exercise group did lose more FM% overall, the extra 1.8% decrease compared to the moderate exercise group wasn't statistically significant. That means we can't be totally sure that the slight difference wasn't just random chance. So, practically speaking.
It seems like you get most of the benefit from adding moderate exercise, but maybe there's more to the story. Let's talk about actual weight and fat loss, not just percentages.
Sure. So, all three intervention groups had big decreases in their total body weight and in the total amount of fat mass they lost in kilograms, again, compared to the control group. And that same trend we saw with fat percentage, it was there too. More exercise tended to mean more weight and fat loss. Both the moderate and high exercise groups lost more total fat mass in kilograms than the diet-only group.
So no matter how you look at it, combining diet and exercise is the most effective way to lose weight and fat overall. But you mentioned something about lean muscle earlier, and that's so important for staying healthy in the long run. What did they find about that?
This is a really important part, especially for keeping your metabolism healthy and avoiding muscle loss, which can happen when you're restricting calories. The study measured fat-free mass, which is a good way to tell how much muscle mass someone has. And the findings here were pretty interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears. What happened with lean muscle?
Get this. The diet-only group, and surprisingly the moderate exercise group too, actually lost some fat-free mass compared to the control group. This is a common problem with dieting. You can end up losing muscle along with the fat.
Yeah, that's not what we want. We want to lose fat and keep our strength. Did either of the exercise groups help protect that lean mass?
Yes. The high exercise group, the ones working out 6 times a week, they basically maintained their fat-free mass. They only had a tiny decrease of 0.2%, which wasn't significant.
That's a huge difference. So moderate exercise was good for overall fat loss, but it wasn't enough to completely prevent some muscle loss while dieting. But working out more often seems like it was the key to holding on to that muscle.
Exactly. To really show this, they looked at what percentage of the total weight loss came from fat-free mass. In the diet-only group, about 22% of the weight they lost was lean mass. The moderate exercise group, that number was 11%, but the high exercise group, only 1%.
1%. That really shows how much better the weight loss was with more exercise. They were almost entirely losing fat.
Totally. It really points to the fact that exercising more can shift how you lose weight. You lose more fat and protect that valuable muscle.
Okay, we've talked about overall fat, lean mass, but the study also looked at visceral adipose tissue, the deeper fat around our organs, right?
That's right. VAT, it's linked to a lot of health risks, so reducing it is a big deal.
What did they find about VAT and the different things the groups were doing?
Good news is all three intervention groups had a decrease in VAT compared to the control group. And just like with overall fat loss, there was that dose-dependent relationship. More exercise usually meant less VAT.
Can you give us some numbers to make that clear?
Sure, the diet-only group had an average reduction of 666 cubic centimeters in their VAT volume. The moderate exercise group, they had a bigger reduction, 1,264 cubic centimeters. And the high exercise group, the biggest decrease, 1,786.4 cubic centimeters.
So exercising more really made a difference in getting rid of that harmful visceral fat.
Absolutely. In fact, the high exercise group had a significantly bigger reduction in VAT compared to the diet-only group. The moderate exercise group also seemed to be better than diet alone, but that difference wasn't quite as clear in this analysis.
All right, so we've covered how the study was done and the main results for all the different things they measured. Now let's bring it back to our listener. What are the practical takeaways from this research if you're trying to lose fat, especially if you have type 2 diabetes?
The main takeaway is that combining calorie restriction with exercise is definitely better for fat loss than just dieting alone. And if you want to lose as much fat as possible and keep your muscle, this study shows that you should probably incorporate a good amount of exercise into your routine.
And it's not just about seeing a lower number on the scale, right? It's about what makes up that weight loss. Are you losing mostly fat and keeping muscle, or are you losing a lot of muscle along with the fat?
You got it. That finding about a higher dose of exercise helping preserve lean muscle mass, that's super important for your health in the long run. Maintaining muscle helps your metabolism, keeps you strong, and can help prevent stuff like sarcopenia, which is especially relevant for people with type 2 diabetes.
But let's be real, working out 6 days a week, that's a lot for most people.
Yeah.
The study did show that the difference in overall fat mass percentage between the 3 days a week group and the 6 days a week group wasn't huge. So how do you balance that time commitment with the potential benefits? What's a realistic approach?
That's the big question. More exercise was best for preserving lean mass and reducing VAT, but the difference in overall fat mass percentage wasn't drastically different from moderate exercise. You got to think about what you can actually keep up with in your own life. Can you really fit in 6 workouts every week? Or would 3 be more doable and therefore more likely to become a habit?
And the study even looked at how much of the weight people lost was actually fat in each group, showing the quality of the weight loss.
Right, that's another super important thing to think about. They found that in the high exercise group, almost all 99% of the weight they lost was fat. That just highlights how much better more exercise can be for changing your body composition. The diet-only group, they lost a much bigger proportion of lean mass along with the fat.
So it's a trade-off. Working out more might not lead to a massive difference in how much fat you lose overall compared to moderate exercise, but it does seem to make the weight loss much better quality by protecting your muscle.
Exactly. You have to weigh the extra time and effort for more exercise against the specific benefits you care about most. If losing fat and keeping muscle is your top priority, then more exercise might be worth it. But if you're more concerned with finding something you can stick with and seeing a good improvement over diet alone, then moderate exercise could be a really good strategy.
Before we finish up, are there any important things to keep in mind about this study that our listeners should consider when thinking about using these findings?
It is important to remember that this study was done specifically on people with type 2 diabetes. The basic ideas about diet and exercise for fat loss probably apply to everyone, but the exact results might not. Also, the study relied on people self-reporting their food intake, which isn't always perfect. And because of some people being excluded from the study, the full effects on VAT and subcutaneous fat might be a little underestimated. But even with that, the overall trends they saw are still really useful.
Okay, let's sum up the key takeaways for our listeners from this deep dive into the DOSECA study.
The main message is that if you want to lose fat, combining cutting calories with exercise is way more effective than just dieting alone. And when it comes to exercise, doing more seems to be even better, not just for losing more fat, but also for keeping that important muscle mass.
But it's not all or nothing. Even adding in a moderate amount of exercise showed big improvements over just focusing on diet.
For sure. It's all about finding a level of exercise that works for you and that you can actually keep up with in your life. Being consistent is more important than doing crazy intense workouts every now and then. Even 3 workouts a week can make a huge difference compared to no exercise when you're trying to lose fat and get healthier.
This deep dive has hopefully given you a better understanding of how and why fat loss works when you combine diet and exercise. So here's something to think about. We've talked about the balance between how much effort you put in and how much your body composition changes. What's one small step you can take today to work towards your health goals, keeping in mind that balance?
As you're thinking about that, we encourage you to see how these findings fit with what you already know and anything else you might be learning. If you have more questions or other topics you'd like us to cover in a future deep dive, please reach out. We're always happy to dig deeper with you.